Hey, med students. Okay, when you're going to select a case, I'm going to talk about why we should trust AI in this situation. Not all the time when we're doing learning is using AI going to make it more effective, but this is one of those examples. And so the temptation is you go to pick your case, and we all know or have in our minds something that we're bad at and want to practice that skill in a sense that we're cramming for something. So the temptation is to go choose topic or choose skill. So you can do this, and I crammed too when I was in med school. Select whatever discipline or body system that you're studying at that time, or you can go skill, practice ECGs. Great. But AI select, what is happening when we click this button? And that's what we've built that is kind of special in the back end. Because maybe you'll go through, you'll do one case, and you'll think, that was all right. I learned a little bit from the case, but what's so special about this AI? So I'm going to pull back for a second and talk briefly about what it takes to build stable knowledge. So here, this is a simplified diagram of what's going on inside of your brain with different concepts and skills. I call this something like a knowledge landscape. And so you've got overall categories like cardiology, and you're aware of things like atrial fibrillation, atrial flutter. You're aware that ECGs are things that help you figure out the difference. And you might be aware that atrial fibrillation can be a cause of a stroke. So you've got this knowledge landscape within your mind of these concepts that are all kind of fuzzily connected. Here's an example of two different knowledge landscapes that might exist in our minds. One is stable knowledge. And I define stable knowledge as knowledge that is durable, so you can remember it over time, and it's flexible, meaning that you can apply it in a variety of circumstances. And a good example of unflexible knowledge is when you practice just multiple choice questions. And so you're really good at selecting A through E, or F, depending on your medical school, A through F on a multiple choice question, but you can't seem to recall it yourself. And that knowledge is not very flexible. You forget it when you're not sitting down looking at a multiple choice question right in front of you. But if you're able to apply this knowledge when you're in the emergency department, or versus when you're waking up on a plane and someone's asking if there's a doctor present, that is the type of knowledge that's flexible and applicable in a variety of circumstances and contexts. Stable knowledge is when the connection between these concepts is strong, the skills applied to them is strong. So that's what a thicker connection between these nodes looks like. Weak knowledge, on the other hand, would look like, okay, this concept, atrial flutter, is sometimes less well understood than atrial fibrillation. Maybe you don't really get the connection with stroke here. And you know how to find an atrial fibrillation on an ECG, but you don't really know the pattern for atrial flutter. That's an example of a weak knowledge graft. You forget this stuff more often, and you're unable to apply it in a variety of circumstances. So the AI is going to look at your knowledge landscape, and it's going to decide, is this learner's landscape stable or weak? And so if it's weak, it's looking at this and it's seeing, here are some really weak connections. So let's apply, this one's also a really weak concept. Let's apply the skill of ECG interpretation to atrial flutter. Boom, that's what your case is. Or maybe you haven't practiced this one in a while, haven't done any reps, and so it's not as strong, or it's trying to help you mature atrial fibrillation by making that connection with strokes. So that is what, once it determines that your graph is weak, it says, let's strengthen this knowledge landscape here and give them cases within this. If it determines that you need to grow, it's looking at this and saying, this is a pretty stable graph, let's add to it. And so it's going to introduce a new concept to you. Now, what concept does it choose? Coming back to the app, it selects the knowledge based on your learning plan. So when you first signed up, depending on when you signed up, you'll have gotten a list of priorities, essentially, that you decided were important. So for me, emergency medicine, cardiology, pulmonology, respiratory, these are core things. So when it goes to pick a new case, it's picking from my priorities. You will get cases throughout all of them because it's really healthy to interleave subjects with each other, but 80% of them will be from these top ones here. And so it's going to disperse across it, but it's going to focus on number one and then a little less on number two, and so on. And so when it looks at your learner landscape, it says this person wants to. It's got a stable graph. We don't need to review anything right now, uh, or we just reviewed and it's getting stronger. Let's add some knowledge. It's going to pick from your priorities. So I know it can be really tempting to want to cram particular subjects, but we are not actually very good at assessing our own strengths and weaknesses. This AI is raw and ruthless on the other side of this. It doesn't think, oh, that person just had a down day. It just knows, oh, you have bad cases on ECG interpretations of atrial fibrillation. Let's give them more cases than that. And so it's a very raw way that if you do day in and day out, it will create a really strong and big knowledge landscape, as opposed to just diving in and cramming on one subject that we really think we need to learn at the expense of all others. So that's why, unless you have a test tomorrow, we've built the AI select method so that you can have a knowledge landscape that is strengthening the weaknesses, it's repeating things often enough, and at the same time recognizing when it needs to grow based on your priorities. That said, if you need to cram, which we all do, this is where I recommend going. Happy learning.